Welcome to Property Power Talks, the exclusive podcast for NB Property Law. I'm your host, Kayleigh Swift, and each episode will dive into cutting-edge insights on property law, probate, estate planning strategies, and seamless estate administration. Whether you're a property investor, homeowner, industry professional, planning your estate, or wanting to understand how estate administrations work, then our expert discussions will empower you with the knowledge you need to navigate the complexities of property and estate planning law with confidence. Let's unlock the power of property and estate planning law together. So thank you everyone for joining us. My name's Kayleigh Swift. I've got Julie Crockett with us as well. So we're going to be talking today all about building wealth, basically a guide to property investment and some success stories we'll go through for first-time investors. So a little bit about myself and NB Property Law. So we're part of a wider group known as No Borders Law Group. We have 4 divisions. So I myself am the director of the NB Property Law, which we cover estate planning as well. We also have NB Employment Law, NB Commercial Law, and NB Migration Law. So we offer a personalised, proactive advice to our clients to help them minimise the risks involved in property and estate planning matters. We're basically more than just a team of legal experts, we like to say. We're dedicated problem solvers, and we're always committed to our clients and helping them to create personalised solutions to help them guide and find a way forward. So in terms of the day-to-day work we do, it can be anything from residential to commercial property law transactions, and also estate planning wise, anything from drafting mum and dad wills and estates to more complex matters, and then dealing with estate administrations and contesting wills, etc. We're here to provide the clarity and guidance basically our clients need to help them find a way forward. Now I'll pass over to Julie to introduce herself as well.
Oh, thanks so much, Kayleigh. It's great to be here. I am the founder of API Solutions. That's a buyer's agency based here in Sydney, and I launched that business in 2010 on the back of quite a long teaching career, but more importantly, I just love property and all to do with property, and have been investing since 2002. So I still run my buyer's agency, but I've also really branched out in recent times to help first-time property investors, because I could see that there were so many coming into the market that were really struggling, and also for buyer's agents as well. So I have courses for first-time property investors, and also I train buyer's agents. And life is good and busy. Thanks,
wonderful. Thank you. So before we start, little disclaimer from Julie. Basically, all the information we're going to go through in this presentation is just general advice and information. So you must speak to either Julie if you're looking to use a buyer's agent to invest in property, and obviously from the legal perspective, none of this is legal information per se. It's just a little bit of guidance and notes to help you along your journey. So in terms of our agenda for today, so we've got a few different topics that we're going to cover off on. The first one will be basically reviewing draft contracts of sale. We'll be exploring the different types of property ownership structures you can have, and also how you go about setting up your portfolio for long-term success and generational wealth. So to get us started, we've got 3 things that you need to do before you start looking at property. So I might pass that one over to you if you want to get started, Julie.
Fantastic, yes. And I hope everyone on here today is ready. I'm going to do some rapid fire a little bit here, but also if you're in the view to taking notes, then by all means take notes. There's plenty here. Hence my ex-teaching background, I'm pouring it all out and giving it all to you today. So I guess the first question I would really like to put to you is, are you investing? Have you invested in property before? Are you contemplating it? Sort of what's your circumstance? And before you actually start looking, it's so incredibly important to actually learn about property investing as much as you can. I I think there are great books out there. I mean, the old obvious ones are things like Rich Dad, Poor Dad. There's also some great newer books as well. I've read pretty much everything that Margaret Lomas, who has been around for probably 20 years, has written. And, you know, it's really important to get yourself and get your head around what property investing involves. So books, seminars are great, webinars, podcasts, blogs, anything you can get your hands on that is going to equip you to really get a grip on exactly how property investing works. Now, one of the things that I will point out at this stage is there are project marketers out there who are not buyer's agents. They are sales agents, and they sell properties for developers and builders. So I'm not talking about those people today who do run very different businesses. But yeah, when you go to seminars, make sure they're educational and they don't have something that people are selling at the back end of that. And I'm also going to give you a few hacks today. So I hope you're in for a few property investing hacks. The first one I'm going to suggest to you is that when you start to look at investing in property, only take advice from those people who have built a property portfolio themselves. Otherwise, just, you know, block out all other noise, because people will have opinions, but in my instance and my experience, the people who get further are the ones who invest in their own knowledge and empower themselves to invest. They look at others for guidance who have already done it, and that's when they feel confident to jump in and to start investing in property. Yeah, and I guess, you know, the other thing would be that you need to make sure that you've got your finance pre-approval in place. That's crucial, because when we go to buy, a sales agent is not going to, you know, listen to you if you haven't got all your ducks in a row and your finance is ready to buy. So those are the important things, those three things. Learn, take advice from only those who actually are doing it, and get your finance pre-approvals in place. Okay, over to mindset, Kayleigh. Now,
Wonderful.
yeah, one of the things that I find, and I've spoken a lot with first-time property investors, and it's incredible how many people are really terrified of investing. And I get it. I can still vividly remember the first time I bought my first investment property back in 2002, and I was signing a mortgage, a loan document. I already had a loan on my own home. I was buying an investment property, and I was terrified myself. And I guess, you know, there's a lot going through your mind when it comes to investing. But let's see if we can actually reframe what's going on in our mind into positive things that can help us when we first start those initial steps into property investment. So what's mindset got to do with it? Absolutely everything. 71% of all property investors only ever have one investment property. And now I have my take on why that is, my opinion. And I think many go through the process, they find it quite daunting and tiring, and they think, wow, I've checked that box, I've got my investment property, I'm good. The sad part is that one investment property is not going to create any future wealth for you. It's going to make a difference, but it won't make a massive difference in the long run. So I want you to keep this in the back of your mind, that if we're going to start investing, have a plan moving forward, but also try and overcome those fears. Now, what kind of fears do people have? Well, let me rattle off a few of them, because these are very real fears, and these have been, I guess, given to me over the years of people who, because I asked them, you know, how are you feeling? What are you thinking? Fear of making a mistake, big time. A fear of debt. And that can stem from previous situations that you've had in life, or even family members who've had bad experiences with debt. lack of knowledge and confidence around investing, good old perfectionism. And, you know, it very quickly leads to her best friend, procrastination. And when you have procrastination in making decisions, it slows everything down and you do miss out on some really good potential purchases. So, yeah, try and knock that one over if you can. The scarcity mindset. I don't know how many people come to me even today and say, "Oh, Julie, I think I've missed the boat. I think I've just left it, you know, too long now, and property's so expensive and now I can never get in." Well, here's the news flash. You know, the predictions are that the median house price here in Sydney was it was getting close to 1.5, 1.6. What they're going, and things have come off a little bit and now they're heading back up. When we get an interest rate drop, my professional opinion is everything will skyrocket again. But what happens is that over time, and they've predicted, demographers have predicted that over the next 20 years, the median prices in Sydney will be around about 4 million. Now, we don't know if that's correct or not. We only can be guided on their forecasting and what have you. Whether it's 2 million, 3 million, 4 million, the story or what I'm saying is it's going to increase in value. So, you know, there's going to be plenty more growth in capital city locations, which is where I buy for my clients, in capital city locations around the country. So I suggest that don't let scarcity put you off, just get in and get going. Fear of failure or judgment is a big one. We don't like to think that our peers are going to think that we made a mistake when we bought property. Put that aside, get in anyway. What I'm seeing a lot in the market is people buying opportunistically. So probably about 2 years ago, when things started to get really interesting in property investing, there are a lot of new people coming into the market buying conservatively priced properties. And then what was happening was 2 years later, they've made a chunk of money and they sell up. Now, that's, I guess, you know, depends on your reasons. Maybe they need the big chunk of money, but really savvy investors leverage those gains that are made in property to buy more property. Don't have a short-term focus when it comes to property investing. The longer the focus, the better. And later on, I'll be talking a little bit about generational wealth, and this will all make perfect sense when I get to that point. So another thing is to have a fear of the unknown. A lot of people haven't invested before, and sometimes they don't have family members or friends who've invested before. So, you know, that fear of the unknown is genuine. But most importantly, of all of the things mentioned, they really don't have a lack of a plan. So if there's no plan, then it's really a matter of them sort of guessing their way through. And when we're spending lots of money, it's really important to have what I call a really strong strategy in place. And I'll be talking a little bit more about that as well. When we don't have a plan, it's a bit like driving to some remote area in Victoria. We know we've got a name of a place, but we don't have a GPS and we don't have a roadmap. You know, we would never do that. And likewise with property investing, not having a strategy in place is a little bit like doing exactly that. Whoa, how are we going, Kayleigh? I feel like I'm powering through.
No, really good. So yeah, some really good tips to take into account there. And I suppose that leads a bit then into the next topic you've got, which is research. So, you know, now we've got our mindset in place and, you know, we understand that this is what we want to be doing and how we're going to do it. I suppose the next step is, you know, what research do we engage you as a buyer's agent to help us with?
Absolutely. And if you're taking notes as well, here we go. Thank you, Kayleigh. When it's interesting when I say the word property research, people have different ideas about what that actually is. And from a buyer's agent perspective, we take this very, very seriously. So research is the basis upon which we find our locations. And I guess how we do it really well is we access everything that's available to us nowadays. When I first started investing in property in 2002, it was a very manual and a very tedious process, and it took a lot of time. These days, we've got software platforms that do amazing things, and they can bring us, all of the information we need in split seconds. We need to analyze, we need to know what we're looking for, and how to actually use these platforms, but they do guide us to some great locations. So firstly, the having access to free tools. Now there's lots of free tools on realestate.com.au, on Domain, etc., where you can find who lives in this area that you're looking to purchase in. What are the demographics? You can sometimes get some of their income stats and, really interesting things, vacancy rates and so on. So access the free tools, but also the property investing hack for research is to spend the money and pay for the research tools. You may only need them for a few months, but they give you so much more information, obviously, than the free tools. So the paid tools are things such as suburbsfinder.com.au, stash properties. There's another one called, there's hashtag, higher than average growth. There's DSR. So there's lots of different ones which I would say are great. Get on the free trials, figure them out. Find out what you can about the locations that you're really wanting to purchase in. And interestingly enough, then, as buyer's agents, I dig deeper into what kind of property type is the preferred property type in the area that you're buying in. Usually closer into a CBD, you're going to be most likely looking at apartments, and further out, houses on land. So it's important to buy the right property type according to the area that you're buying in. I also look for schools, shops, transport, places that have got lifestyle precincts are becoming more and more popular, where you can just either drive a short distance or walk, even better, to lots of local cafes, and maybe they've got a little theatre or a little walking track, all those things that people really love to have access to these days. Then they're great. And I always look to match the strategy that I have in place with the properties. So the property comes last. Now, I know that sounds a little bit counterintuitive, but as a buyer's agent, that's what we do. We look at our strategy, we look at what we are needing to source, and then we go and source the property that fits it. So I hope that makes sense. Also look at vacancy rates and rental yields, and the thing, and how many days the properties are being on market before they're being sold. That's a really good indicator of an emerging market when you get rising rents and falling days on market. That's just a couple of indicators that that looks to be shaping up to be a really good place to invest. Okay, so yep, and I've already told you about the hack. Do the paid tools. There you go. On to due diligence, one of my favourite ones as well, because here's where we work out whether or not the properties we've by this stage found the location. We're going to be looking at properties. Do they stack up? And how do I check to make sure that they do stack up? So due diligence is really all about risk, making sure that the property I'm looking to buy has less risk, if I can put it that way. So it entails a whole lot of more drilling down, I guess, into making sure that that property is as it is represented on realestate.com.au if it's an on-market property. Believe it or not, here's a tip. Real estate agents, and forgive me if there are some in here, because I'm sure if there are some real estate agents listening that they would never do this, But sometimes on realestate.com.au, Domain, etc., old photos are used in new property listings. So it's really, really important for this due diligence piece that I put an independent person in to inspect that property. I do not accept a sales agent's video if I'm buying interstate and I can't get to that inspection. I do not accept their video. I make sure that I have a property manager who goes and looks at that property on my behalf. They're independent, and while they're there, they can actually then give me a rent appraisal, an independent rent appraisal as well for the property. It's really important then to go through these stats. How old is the property? What are the council rates? What are the water rates? If you're in certain states in Australia, what is the land tax on that property? Also, I look at fire, flood, where what the property is zoned for, which means then I can look at what opportunities might exist down the track to extend or split or whatever the block. I also now, and I've only done this in the last few years, looked at cyclones, because cyclones and those big weather events are starting to become reality here in Australia. We've always had fire and flood, but yeah, and we've also always had cyclones for that matter, but the weather events are becoming more and more obvious to us and huge in insurance payouts. So yeah, the other one is insurance costs. If I'm buying in an area, let's say it's far north Queensland, and that area gets, say, 6 cyclones a year in varying severity, what are the insurance costs for that property? I drill down into every aspect. If you're buying into strata, what are the fees for strata? Always check the reports. Always make sure that there are no special levies coming up that are going to slap you with a huge levy that you have to then pay because you're now a new owner in that development. Any future developments that are coming online. So you might be buying, say, a house in a really lovely suburb, but there's lots more land yet to be subdivided. You can check with council to see what future developments are coming online in that area, because that could be a risk to oversupply in time. And then, what future possible subdivision can I find something in that area that I could subdivide down the track? Maybe. Of course, we then do building and pest inspections, which is right down the bottom of my list. I do all these things first. And if all these things stack up on my property, then I will obviously make an offer, have an offer accepted, then do building and pest inspection. And most importantly, I always do a cash flow analysis, because you must understand what the numbers are telling you. If a property is really heavily negatively geared, then that can be a bit of a train wreck for your cash flow. On my website, juliecrockett.com.au, I have a free cash flow calculator which you can access. So by all means, you can check that out later on. My property investment hack here is invest in emerging suburbs. So not those that are far out that have got lots of land, but emerging suburbs that are showing all the indicators of getting really good, strong capital growth in a very short period of time. Have a look for those. Oh, we're on a roll. How about now we flip over, Kayleigh, to all the costs involved. Now, these are significant, and if you looked at these first up before you invested in property, you might not want to, you might be horrified, but it's the cost of doing business. And when we run investment properties, when we hold them, it's like another business that we have on the side. I love, and why I invested in the first place and have kept on investing over 20 plus years, is that when we get this right, the cost of doing business, which I'm about to outline here, is absolutely worth doing. Absolutely worth doing. particularly if you have a strategy of buy and hold, because that is going to get you further in the long run. It's a little bit counterintuitive, but you hold and you do make a lot of money. I'm going to go through that in a minute as well. But first of all, the upfront costs are, obviously it's the purchase price of the property. Then we've got good old stamp duty, and we've got conveyancing, which is right up Kayleigh's alley there. The building and pest reports, the loan application fee, the loan mortgage insurance. I'm going to have a bit to say about LMI in a minute too. You need the obviously the deposit. There may be valuation fees involved in there. If you use a buyer's agent, there's a buyer's agent fee, which is tax deductible, but when you sell. So a buyer's agent fee is considered a capital cost, and that's when you get it back, it's basically deducted from your capital gains tax calculation at the end. The ongoing costs are obviously, your mortgage repayments, the council rates, water rates, property management fees, landlord insurance, strata, repairs and maintenance, land tax, if it's applicable, income and it's offset against your income tax, depreciation schedule, connection to water utilities, etc. And of course, the selling costs. Presumably you've made a gain on the property, so there will be capital gains tax, real estate sales commissions, advertising, marketing, and my property hack here is, and it's a little bit counterintuitive again, consider paying LMI, loan mortgage insurance, to get you into the next property faster. So interestingly enough, I've had clients who have used this as a strategy. So they've had quite a large deposit, and they've said, right, I can actually I'm in the position to buy 2 properties, but I'll have to pay loan mortgage insurance. And then they've calculated what that figure would be in their LMI and considered, again, it's a cost of doing business, but rather than just putting all their deposit into their first property, they've actually managed to leverage what they've got into 2 properties. So there's a hack. Okay, we're building a portfolio, which is pretty amazing. And how we do this is absolutely more strategy. So first and foremost, when we think about it, the vast majority of people do not go out and pay cash for their properties. Mostly they leverage, they have a deposit, or they have equity from an existing property, and then they go out and get funds, get a loan. Now, the loan is crucial to building a portfolio because it's not just about, as I just expressed before, it's not just about buying any property, and likewise, it's not just about getting any loan. What we need to be looking at as far as loans are concerned is, what is the loan structure for the first property that is actually going to help me to set up myself for the second property? Because if I'm building a property portfolio, the finance is the key factor in making this work, along with the strategy. So the finance strategy would be, as you keep buying properties, your basically your loan to value ratio keeps increasing. And what we need to be doing is looking at lenders that, and I know there's probably mortgage brokers in this group listening right now, we need to be factoring in the lenders that are going to help us to keep moving forward with our property portfolio. So have a really good talk with your an experienced mortgage broker who can help you to set up this structure so that you won't be stuck with just, a couple of properties for an extended period of time. All right, so let's have a look at ways we can build a property portfolio. It's not just buy a house, buy a house, buy a house, buy a house, buy a house. It is, how can I extract more value and build more value in so I actually can build my asset base, if you like. So, for example, I have a client who has a rooming house strategy, and he only buys properties for the specific purpose of turning them into rooming houses. Now, there's a whole lot of due diligence around that, but that's a strategy and it's worked beautifully well for him. It's a huge cash flow strategy. Maybe you're thinking, well, I can buy a house on a really big block of land and then I can subdivide the land, sell off the block, or build later on at the back, and that gives me two investments. Like, there's lots of ways of doing that one as well. Renovation is a really good one. If you've got the appetite for renovation, then by all means, that's a really good way to build a property portfolio as well. I have other clients who only buy duplexes because they've got two incomes straight up. And that also helps with cash flow. The more cash you get, the more likely you are for the bank to lend you more money. And likewise with granny flats. So property investing hack with this one: leverage your equity in your properties and use offset accounts for deposits. Now, that's not advice. That is just simply a suggestion, and it may not be right for you, but check it out. So using your equity, use your offset accounts. Okay, and setting up for generational wealth. Now, how do we do that? Well, we first of all need to be looking at, and if that's the strategy, we go in day one with that strategy, buying quality investment properties that are going to, I guess, stand the test of time. And we would combine a little bit of the previous strategy, building a property portfolio, to make sure that this generational wealth works as well. Because whenever we're buying property, we can't always assume that we're going to have our jobs, our current income, to be able to keep servicing loans. So it generally, over a long period of time, means that we have to look at other ways of producing cash flow from our properties, as I suggested before. We need to focus on how we can keep adding value over time. So obviously one suggestion would be to buy something on a larger block that is going to at some point be subdividable. That makes total sense. And if you can buy it and hold it for the long term without doing that, that's a great thing, because usually the longer we hold on to property, the more valuable it gets, and particularly the land content. And get creative about how you produce that cash flow. It could be renting out rooms or whatever strategy really suits you best. And realistically, you need to be doing this in conjunction with a really, really good, savvy accountant who's going to, and I always use people that have done property investing themselves, so they know exactly what I'm trying to achieve. So use a good accountant. And it leads me into, a beautiful segue here, Kayleigh, for, making sure that you're working side by side with an estate planner who can also guide you on, how this is all going to be set up and working for you, so that, you get the very best out of your generational wealth. Now, I would say whatever you choose to do today, don't delay. Action is what gets you, far and wide. And make sure, I guess, that you stay on track. If your goal is to, purchase 6 properties over the next 6 to 10 years, keep on track. And I wish you all the very best. Thanks, Kayleigh.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for that, Julie. Some really great tips there. I even wrote down a couple myself. So you can never know everything about property, I don't think. Everyone's always learning. So the research component was great, and some of the due diligence. And obviously everyone's doing this with the intention of building a property portfolio and, having that generational wealth for years to come. So I suppose what I'm going to do now is touch on some of the things you've spoke about and try and tie them in with the legal side of things. So obviously, in terms of actually owning property, like how do we go about that? Who can actually own the property then here in Queensland? So for Queensland to own a property, you need to be a natural person over the age of 18. Otherwise, it needs to be a corporation or a trust. So if we're entering into a property, we can own it as, in our own name. Otherwise, for other reasons, asset protection reasons and things like that, we may look at other structures. So that could be setting up a company. So a lot of developers will do, set up a different company per development that they do. Otherwise, we might just have the one company that owns a lot of our assets. And then the third option is a trust. So that there's different types of trusts and that available, family trusts and things like that, discretionary trusts. Now, again, we're providing the legal advice, but as Julie mentioned before, it is important that you've got a good accountant on your side to help and guide you with what is the best option for you and your property portfolio in terms of ownership structures and how we go about that, and getting those set up before we sign the contract. Once we sign the contract, it is legally binding, and if we are to change the owner of the property once the contract is signed, there will be extra costs involved because we do need to do what's called a deed of rescission, which comes with extra legal costs for the other side that's drafted the contract, and then enter into a new contract into the correct entity. Otherwise, even probably a worst case scenario is if we actually purchased a property in the wrong name or the wrong entity and decided down the track that we wanted to transfer it across to another entity or name, we're going to have to pay transfer duty again on that purchase. So we want to make sure that we've got the property owner at the outset correct, and that it's going to be the best structure that suits our needs to provide some protection for us as well. So what then are the pros and cons of the different types of ownership structures that we have? So I suppose I'll start first with the individual name if we're purchasing in an individual capacity. So the pros of this one is if you're looking to live in the property, you'll be entitled to potentially transfer duty concessions. Now, transfer duty, formerly known as stamp duty in Queensland, a concession is available for different types of people. So there is a first home transfer duty concession. That means that if it's a first home property purchase for you, you've never owned or lived in property anywhere, then you are entitled to potentially a first home transfer duty concession, but you must live in the property for at least 12 months and within 12 months of settlement. And the purchase price does have to be under $700,000 to pay no transfer duty. If it's above $700,000 but under $750,000, there will be a first home transfer duty concession, but that amount will be based on the price. Otherwise, if we have owned property in Australia, we are still going to use it as a principal place of residence, then we can be entitled to just what's called a home concession. Now, that home concession is basically a discount on the transfer duty amount. Again, it depends on what the purchase price is as to what that amount will be. We will generally calculate that amount as well for our clients when we get a contract, or even before they sign the contract. If they want to know what the amount will be, we can use the calculator to work out what transfer duty they need to budget for, which is one of the things Julie mentioned earlier as a cost for buyers. Another pro, I suppose, of purchasing an individual name is it's generally easier and cheaper to get finance approval. So, the banks know, who you are as an individual. You've probably been banking with, whatever fund or bank it has been for years. Your wages generally go to you personally and those types of things. So getting finance approval is a lot more simpler because, we're not dealing with all these different structures and assets and, potentially having to provide guarantees and things like that. It's also, sometimes there's some tax benefits. Obviously transfer duty is one type of tax, but there's obviously other tax, Julie's mentioned before, capital gains tax, those types of things. So that could be a pro. Again, that's something we're not providing tax advice on. You do need to speak to your accountant as to what is the best cost-effective way for you. Otherwise, it's generally simple. We are an individual. We just sign a contract. We don't have to go and, be getting a new company set up or a new trust set up. It's already, our name already exists. We already have verification of identity documents. It's quite easy to purchase in our own name. I suppose the con, though, is there is limited asset protection, though, when purchasing an individual name. Not necessarily a con, I guess, if we're not concerned or we don't really have any reason to need asset protection in terms of, we don't run any companies, or, we don't have any personal guarantees out there or anything like that. If that's the case, no one's going to be coming to claw back on the property that we may own in our individual name. Sometimes, though, we may pay a higher tax rate, though, if we are purchasing as individuals, as what we would if we were purchasing in another structure. And also sometimes land tax can mean a higher land tax bill as well if it's in an individual name. So they're all things to think about. Like I said, obviously good to chat to your accountant and financial planner as well when looking at structure. We can obviously put the property into whichever name you instruct us to put it in, but we want to make sure that that's right for you, and that may be involving those other parties and professionals to help guide you on that process. Now then, the corporation. So what are the pros and cons of purchasing a property in a corporation name? So I suppose the pro is that, it does provide us with some asset protection. A corporation is a separate entity to ourselves. Unless the corporation requires a personal guarantee by the director, which could be you, then really the purchase of the property in the corporation's name can't be tied back to the individual. There can be more tax benefits that are available to a corporation, and also potentially limited liability, like I said, unless we have provided a personal guarantee for that one. So there are a few cons there. Again, everyone's situation is different, so we need to look at someone individually as opposed to a holistic approach. I suppose the cons, though, of purchasing in a corporation would be that there isn't any type of capital gains tax discount available. It can sometimes also be a bit more of a complex structure to set up, and therefore ongoing administration costs, generally on a yearly basis. There may be no negative gearing provisions available as well, and the corporation could be faced with some higher lending costs as well. So sometimes banks will charge a higher rate to a corporation than what they will to a individual, because often a corporation cannot have a principal place of residence, obviously, because they're not an individual, so they're not getting transfer duty concessions, and they won't be paying a principal place of residence lending amount. They'll be paying an investment loan. Now, the last structure we spoke about is the trust. So I suppose, what are the pros and cons of having the property owned by the trust? So the pros with this one, again, we're getting the asset protection element in here, because we've like a company, a trust is also a separate entity, and so it can be distinguished from the individual, and therefore wreak no havoc on that individual and what they own. Again, some more tax benefits can be applied to this one. Another difference, though, with the trust opposed to the company is estate planning. So Julie touched on estate planning briefly before with the generational wealth. So estate planning with trusts are somewhat important in that a trust can own assets, being property, and those assets then can just simply be passed down to whoever is listed as beneficiaries of that trust. So, first layer may be whoever, maybe the parents that are realistically the ones putting in the money, and then it could be their children. So, realistically, the property doesn't even need to be transferred, because it's just owned by the trust, and it just has automatically set up that generational wealth then. Trust can also give a bit more flexibility in terms of, like I said, trusts can own different things. They can also provide a bit more control as well if we're purchasing property under a trust as opposed to another type of structure. There are still cons, though, when purchasing in a trust entity as well. Like the company, there's no CGT discount for trust. It can also be complex again to set it up, and the ongoing administration costs involved in doing that. Again, there's no negative gearing provisions available, and like with the companies, you may face higher lending costs from the banks as opposed to purchasing in the individual name. So how can land actually be owned then? So, when we're purchasing potentially as an individual or company, there may just be one potential owner, which is a sole tenancy. So one entity, one individual. The other option is joint tenancy. So that's where we're owning the property by two or more entities. So for example, husband and wife, they often will own a property as joint tenants. Now that would mean that if one tenant was to pass before the other, that tenant's share would automatically go to the surviving joint tenant. Now, the thing to note here is it doesn't matter what that person that's passed away, what their will has said. The will has nothing to do with it. Basically, joint tenant just automatically gives the person that's passed away's share to the surviving joint tenant. If that's not something that the entities want or the individuals want. The other option listed here is tenants in common. Now, this is, again, still has to be 2 or more entities to make up a joint a tenancy in common agreement, but we can also own split shares here. So unlike joint tenants, which is quite split, equal 50-50, tenants in common can be a different split. So it could be, for example, 30% to one entity or individual and the other 70% to the other. So obviously tenants in common would be quite a used approach by, people that are going into property investment, maybe as a joint venture, developing, different properties, or, just doing little small developments, splitting blocks and things like that, because they're not necessarily husband and wife, they're really in it for a business relationship, and therefore if something got to go wrong, they want it to go to, who is listed in the will, which is when the will comes into play for tenants in common. And so we always need to make sure when clients are stipulating that it's tenants in common, that one, we find out how the share is going to be split, the percentage, whether it is 50-50 or, maybe someone's only putting 10% capital, and then therefore the 90% is going to the remaining party. And then obviously also making sure that that person, if they're individuals, has a will in place. And if it's a corporation, there still needs to be considerations made to estate planning. So when we are dealing with people doing, wills and estate planning, and they've got a bit more complex structures, so, there's companies and trusts involved, we are actually looking at, what the company constitution says. If there is a shareholders agreement, so there's, multiple shareholders, what happens if a shareholder's to pass away, what happens to their shares? And with trust, similar situation, who is the appointer? If the appointer was to pass away, is there provisions to allow for an alternative appointer to be put in place? And again, like, we would stipulate some of those things in the will if those documents didn't allow for those provisions. So the next one I'll go through is what to actually check on a draft contract. So Julie's taken us through, you've done your research, you've done your due diligence, you've therefore found, what you think is the ideal property, and you're wanting to actually go in and sign a contract. Now, that's great to do. We would always recommend that our clients come and have a chat to us, send us the draft contract before it's actually signed, because as I mentioned before, even something as simple as, changing the entity on the contract can really cause, a lot of headaches, a lot of extra money that really didn't need to be spent if we got the advice and instructions up front. So that's why we need to make sure that that buying entity is absolutely correct. When we're purchasing in individuals, we often see that a middle name hasn't been included, someone's first name's been spelt wrong, whatever it is. And also very common, we always see, the second person's not even included on the contract. For whatever reason, husband's gone and signed the contract and forgot to add the wife, or, they didn't have pre-approval for finance, and all of a sudden the bank's like, well, no, we can't just lend to one of you. We want you both on title, whatever it is. So always make sure we've got that buying entity correct. Another thing we're always checking is, do the timeframes that have been stipulated in the contract allow you sufficient time to satisfy the conditions? So conditions we're talking about are generally, we'll have in Queensland contracts subject to building and pest. That may be 7 days, but sometimes that's really tight. Even unless you've got a building and pest inspector in mind and they've clarified for you that they'll be able to do that within that time frame, you might need to put something more like 14 days. For finance, again, we want to be speaking to your finance broker as to how long they think the bank's going to need. If you've got pre-approval, 14 days may be doable. If not, you might need something more like 21 days. If you're buying in a different structure, for example, self-managed super fund, you might need something more like 28 days. So, you'll be dictated by what your finance broker says in regards to that. And then our settlement time frame. So that's probably the last most common one, the three dates we see in the contract. Now, settlement date, standard might be about 30 days, but obviously if we've got a 28-day finance, and that's not going to be satisfactory, so you might need to push it out more to 45, 60 days. It's really up to what you as the buyer and also the seller wants as a settlement date. So, it can be, like I said, as the smaller one we see more commonly is 30, sometimes 60 days, somewhere in the middle, 45 days. We certainly do see 90-day contracts, though, from time to time. Anything beyond that, you've got to be aware that you're potentially going to be starting to pay what's called unpaid tax interest on the transfer duty, unless we pay the transfer duty once we go unconditional, because we've got a certain period to pay that once we do go unconditional. Now, we're also going to be checking on the draft contract as to whether the property has been sold with vacant possession, or is there a tenant in the property. Now, this is important, obviously, for the buyer, because they may be wanting to use the property as their principal place of residence. Now, they are still entitled to a transfer duty concession if there's a tenant in the property, but the tenant is going to be in there for less than 6 months from when we settle, then we can still be entitled to the transfer duty concession. That only applies, that exemption, that provision only applies where there's a tenant stipulated on the contract. All other means we can't buy the property, rent it out for 6 months, and then still get that concession. It's only when they're listed on the property. If it is being sold with vacant possession, we always recommend clients do what's called a pre-settlement inspection as close to settlement as they can. Generally recommend doing that on the morning of settlement if possible, to make sure that vacant possession is actually occurring. So, when we go and sign a contract, the property's generally got a lot of furniture, people are still living there, and we need to make sure on the morning of settlement they're actually going to be vacating on time. And if they're not going to, or if there's been issues with the property, so if the property is not in the same condition it was when you signed the contract, we need to know that as your lawyers, so that we can basically extend settlement if we need to, request rectification of some defects that have occurred between the date you sign the contract and the settlement date, and those types of things. Other thing we're checking with our draft contracts is what's actually been included with the property. So in our contracts here in Queensland, there's a provision that states, included chattels and excluded fixtures. So included chattels, for example, could be a range of different things. Sometimes people are selling properties fully furnished. Sometimes they might be leaving property that would otherwise be immovable, like things like a spa or bar fridge, or barbecue outdoor dining area and things like that. A lot of people sometimes also stipulate some of the things that just go missing, air conditioning remotes, or a microwave that's somewhat bolted in, or things like that. We can always get listed in the contract, even things like blinds and things like that could easily be taken. And then any special conditions that have been drafted into the contract, or maybe that we might need to include. So Julie spoke about an important one before, which is due diligence. Now, due diligence is a very broad condition, that could really cover off on finance and building and pests and all the extra ticks and checks that we're doing. So a due diligence is a good condition for, definitely like developers, if they're looking to subdivide lands, to make sure they can do that before they proceed with the purchase. Sometimes due diligence might be used if you're wanting to do some extra searches, for example, council searches, you're not sure if certain structures have been approved. We can generally do that under a building and pest clause, but if it is a shorter period, we might not have time. And a really important one, I always think, for people purchasing property that's part of a body corporate, is what's called a body corporate building record search. Now, the contracts in Queensland, where they're sold as part of body corporate, there is a disclosure statement that's required to be given. That disclosure statement is quite brief. It only really gives information about what are the current body corporate levies and, what are the assets the body corporate owns. A special condition that's drafted for a body corporate records search condition. Now that search, it's not a cheap search, might be, around $500, $550, but it gives a lot of information about the body corporate. Now, the thing that this search includes will be things like the community management statement outlining the bylaws, if there's asbestos in the body corporate areas, if the property, like what the forecast for the next, 10 years of maintenance works are, what's in the sinking fund, if there are any special levies that are due to be struck or have been striked, because basically if there's not enough money in the sinking fund and then there's all this maintenance needed over the coming years, each of the body corporate owners could need to be putting in an extra, 10, 15 grand each year until they get enough money in the sinking fund to pay for those, urgent maintenance things that are needed to be repaired. So it is a good condition, that one, and it is one that we would always recommend for body corporates, especially when they're not a brand new body corporate, because brand new, if it's, relatively new, only a couple of years old, there's generally not going to be maintenance issues and builder warranties will come into play. So I suppose they're the main things that I think need to be checked on the draft contracts. But like I said, we do want to see the draft contracts prior to our clients signing them, just so we can give it the once over and give them the reassurance they need before they sign up to this legally binding document. So they're basically the few things that I wanted to go through in terms of purchasing property in Queensland as an investor, and things to be aware of, and the structures that you can use to purchase property. Okay, I think that concludes us. Thank you very much, Julie, for joining us. Appreciate your time and knowledge, and wish everyone luck on their investment journeys.
Thank you, Kayleigh. It was a really good, exciting time. Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Property Power Talks. We hope you found today's insights valuable and engaging. If you enjoyed the show, don't forget to subscribe and leave us a review. For more information or to connect with our expert team at MB Property Law, then please visit our website at noborderslawgroup.com.au. We look forward to having you join us next time for more expert advice and actionable strategies to master the world of property law. Until then, stay informed and stay empowered.